Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth session of the Spring 2021 Sunoikisis Digital Cultural Heritage module. This session is going to be on linked geographical data and web mapping, and we're delighted to be joined by co-organizer and longtime collaborator Valeria Vitale, who's at the British Library, by Professor Chen, who is at Yale, if I'm not mistaken, and by another old friend, Rainer Simon from the Austrian Institute of Technology, and most well known as the developer behind many magic tools coming out of the Pelagios Project. This session is one of 4 sessions that have relationship to geographical technologies and geographical tools. There was a session 2 weeks ago on community mapping, and there'll be a session next week on indigenous cultural heritage, where we'll see some mapping sites, and another session, I think 3 weeks time, on GIS, geographical information systems. So there's a bit of continuity between these sessions, and we'll see that in some of the exercises and some of the readings that are suggested. If you're following this live, please do use the live chat feature in YouTube, which you'll see either to the right or below the video, to say hi and let us know you're there, and also to ask any questions that come up as we're talking. And at the end, we will invite specific questions and comments during the discussion that we have then. If you're not watching this live, if you found this later, or if you found this accidentally randomly on YouTube, if you look below the video in the description, you will find a link back to the session page for this, which has some readings and some suggested exercises, which you're welcome to follow, to try out, to use with your students, and you're welcome to get in touch with any of us if you have any questions or thoughts about that. We're very happy for this not only to be a resource for everybody to use today in February 2021, but to be a resource that could be used, any time thereafter. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to my colleagues, and I believe Valeria will be kicking off.
Yes, thank you, Gabby. Last time that I was here, we were talking about community mapping and citizen science, and we started introducing the concept of gazetteers. But as we promised that time, we're now going to talk a lot more about it. And I will start with a very brief introduction about linked open data in general, and then we will dive into gazetteers more specifically. So I'd like to share my screen now, please. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So today we talk about linked geographical data and web mapping, but that's a bit of a lie. We're going to talk mostly about gazetteers. So let's start our introduction to gazetteers. And to understand why, one of the reasons why gazetteers are so interesting and so useful, I'm going to explain you the very basics of how linked open data work, so that we can better appreciate the role that gazetteers play into that. So what are linked open data? Well, the name is actually pretty descriptive. It's about having pieces of information that were not created at the same time, were not created by the same author, that are connected. And in the moment in which they are connected, they become more relevant and more informative. And linked open data has, in many ways, an open structure, so that new information can always be added on top of it. So it's a sort of, growing ecosystem. And each time we look for these connections, we may discover new things. We may find new relationships that we were not aware of. So it is a quite straightforward in a way, but also very powerful concept, and it relies on relatively simple from a technological point of view technology that is mostly text-based. But, well, like all great things, it also has some rules. Now, maybe not all great things, but some great things definitely need some rules. And what are the rules? What are the main ingredients, let's say, to produce linked open data? And I know this is a very, very rough and dirty and quick introduction to linked open data. We're not having a proper lesson on linked open data in this semester, but bear with me, and I'll take you from here to Gazetteers. So what are the ingredients? What is the recipe we should follow to produce linked open data? If we were, for example, a researcher that wanted to share in this environment their data, their research, or if we were, for example, a cultural institution that wanted to, to share their catalogs in this fashion, what should we do? So there are a few things that are really, really key and let's say are necessary in order to produce linked open data. One is that, well, the data have to be online, and this is quite simple and intuitive. If you want your data to be connected to other data and to be found online, to be harvested online, you have to put it there. If you put it out there with an open license, then we can talk about linked open data. And the O in the acronym stands exactly for open, which means that the data has to be open to achieve that. You can have linked data if you don't want to use open data, but we're focusing on the open ones mostly in this discussion. Then the other crucial thing is that they have to be expressed in a specific format. So we can think of linked data as, let's say, statements that we make about what is that connects two entities, two things. And, these entities could be pretty much anything. They could be people, they could be places, as we will see, they could be events, they could be ideas. And we say something about why they relate to each other. But we have to express this relationship, this information, in a very specific way. So using a particular format or a series of particular formats. And RDF is one of the most popular. And RDF stands for Resource Description Framework. And like all linked open data format, it has to be machine readable, because linked open data are useful when they can be harvested computationally. But it's also, in a way, smart enough that it can be sort of understood by humans as well. And that's because it has very much the structure and the looks of a very simple sentence in the English language. So we have a subject, a predicate, and an object. Which is why RDF statements are often referred to as triples as well. If this sounds complicated, don't worry, because as I said, this is just an introduction. We are getting to really the core of our class today, which is the fact that it is absolutely crucial when we want to build or to contribute to a linked open data environment, that when we refer to those entities that we were talking about before, those persons, those places, those ideas or events, we don't refer to them through their names, because their names might be confusing for a machine. But we refer to them using something a little bit more unambiguous. We use something that is, very much, let's say, unmistakably identifying what we're talking about. And these unique codes that are a little bit like, fingerprints for the entities that we're talking about are called URIs, which stands for Uniform Resource Identifiers. And they are unique codes, unique series of letters and numbers that identify that specific entity. And these URIs are collected in curated lists, so that we can trust that when we want to talk about a specific entity, for example, I don't know, Julius Caesar, or Xerxes, or Athens, we know where to look for the right URI to refer to that entity. We go to, let's say, the right list that has been curated by editors that we trust, because they have some scientific grounds, they have done research, so we have reliable lists of these URIs, which are also called authority lists, that we can rely on. And now we are getting there. The lists, these curated lists that collect information about places, that give us URIs for places, are called gazetteers. So meet gazetteers. And we just said that gazetteers are basically indexes of names of places and the related information, basically, which may sound really, really anticlimactic, but we're now going to talk a little bit more about why actually gazetteers are more important than this dull definition that probably comes from Wikipedia wouldn't let us imagine. And gazetteers are by no means a digital invention. We used to have gazetteers before, but digital gazetteers are becoming more and more prominent in historical research for a number of very good reasons. And one of them is exactly how powerful they are in helping us connecting information. And the absolutely key role, they have been defined really the backbone of linked open data. And imagine, for example, that we want to tell a machine, we want to record that a place called London and a place called Londra, that we found these references in different documents. We want to express the fact that they actually refer to the same place. But a machine, an API, wouldn't recognize them as the same place, because the string of the name is different. So it wouldn't be a perfect match for the machine. So we need to tell in our linked open data that this reference to London and the reference to Londra in another document that is obviously in Italian are actually referring to the same place. And we do that using the same URI from a gazetteer. For example, the Geohames Gazetteer, that is a quite large and well-established contemporary gazetteer. And the URI will obviously be, at that point, a perfect match. At the same time, we can use gazetteers to tell in linked open data language that a reference to the place London in the UK and the reference to the place London in the United States is not the same place, even though a machine might think that they are actually the same place, because they are a perfect match string-wise. So we use different URIs to make that absolutely clear and unambiguous that we're talking about two different places. So this was a very, very simple and straightforward example to show how useful gazetteers can be for us to disambiguate place references in our documents, in our research, in museum metadata, in library metadata, numismatic metadata, and so on. Also think of how much more powerful could metadata be if they were systematically using gazetteers references when they mention places, and how easier would it be, for example, to search across collections and even among different collections in different institutions if all the place mentions were accompanied by the use of a gazetteer URI. So we wouldn't have, problems about, places having variant names or having, their name changed 2 times or different languages, because when different records refer to the same place, they would always use the same gazetteer URI. But I think that gazetteers are a very useful infrastructure, and they definitely support scholarly work. They definitely support the existence of linked open data and a number of linked open data projects, including Pelagios that we mentioned last time. But I think that gazetteers are also, and for some of us mainly, a product of scholarly research in their own right. And that is because actually expressing the information that we have about places of the past is not an easy task. It takes a lot of decisions. It takes a lot of of thinking how to structure the data, how to use the structure of the data to communicate what we know and what we don't know about those places, and how can we capture in something that can be very rigid as data structures, concepts that are so fluid and so nuanced as the concept of place. And also, how can we record all the sources from which our knowledge of the place is coming. So I think that actually gazetteers are surely useful, but they're also really, really an interesting piece of research in their own right. And if what I've said, oh no, sorry, I was going ahead of myself. And that is because, as I was saying, talking about place is not easy. And there are a lot of conceptual, differences that could be made. And for example, we could say that the ancient city of Londinium and the contemporary city of London, they may share the same coordinates roughly, but could we actually say that they are the same place? To what extent are they the same place? Should they have the same URI, or should they have different URIs? Well, my answer would be they're not the same place. And how do we capture that? Well, there are various approaches to that, but the one that I prefer is the fact that actually we don't have one massive, giant, all-including gazetteer for every single place that ever existed in the world, because that would be just unmanageable and probably meaningless. What we have, and I really love that, and I think that that is definitely the way to go, is a constellation of smaller gazetteers that have a specific focus. They may focus on a period of time or an area or a theme. Like, for example, the one that we see on the left is a screenshot from the Gazetteer of the Ancient World, Pleiades. And we'll talk more about Pleiades in a minute. And the one that you see on the right is a screenshot from Geohames that we mentioned before. So you see also, visually and from the interface point of view, how different is the representation of arguably the same place, or maybe not. And that is because these two gazetteers, even though they're focusing on an entity that is located at the same coordinates, they are capturing two different aspects of that location. They are capturing two different places. And so we have two, and actually we have more than two URIs for London, but in our example we have two URIs. And one is we will use when we want to talk about London in Roman times, or in ancient times, or maybe in early medieval times, and one we use if we want to talk about London now. Let's have a closer look at one gazetteer. So that, as I said, there are many gazetteers, and they have different scope, and they might also have obviously different structures and different interfaces. And there isn't an archetypical gazetteer model. There isn't necessarily a correct way to do it, but we're going to look at the Pleiades Gazetteer because it's the one that it's closer to our interest as classicists and archaeologists. So let's leave this presentation, and let's look at one sample entry in the Pleiades Gazetteer. There is absolutely no reason I've chosen Acrogas. It's just because it looked nice and it had photographs. So this is what we have. This is how a gazetteer looks like. As I said, it could be different, but we're looking at Pleiades right now. And what do we find? We have...
Can you increase the font size a tiny little bit, please, Valeria?
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
Is that enough?
Perfect, yeah.
Okay. So we have a map that tells us where that place is. It's a city in Sicily. We have here, you see, we have a main page, and we have other icons here. Let's try to understand better what are the components of an entry in a gazetteer. So here, with the icon of the compass, we have locations. And you might be surprised by the fact that locations is plural, but actually we could have more than one location for the same place. And that could be because the location is disputed, or because different sources have recorded it at different places, or just because Pleiades got a better location later on, but for transparency kept the old location as well. So we could have one or more locations. And then here with this icon with a little tag, we have one of the most fun things that you can find in a gazetteer, which is variant names. And I hope that Anne will talk more about variant names later. And recording variant names is not only, as I said, a lot of research fun, but that also means that if you look for any of these names, you will always end up at the main record. So this is a great way of consolidating and collecting different references to the same main URI. We also have relationships, both at a parent level. So what are the things that are bigger than Agrigentum that are related to it? Like, for example, the island of Sicily and the children. What are the things that are, let's say, contained in Agrigentum? And other absolutely key thing, we have evidence, because the Pleiades Gazetteer, as all let's say academic gazetteers, all gazetteers that have an editorial board, are really, really, let's say, strict about only having information that can be related to external, can be, let's say, resolved to external sources. But arguably, the most important bit of this page is this one. And this one is the URI that Pleiades mints for the place of Agrigentum. And I'm slightly overrunning, so I want to show you quickly just a couple more things about Pleiades. One is that if you click on any of the names, you see that the name is a separate page and it has its own evidence. And that's because the names as well have to be attested in historical sources or in secondary sources. And I just want to spend a couple of words about what you see in this right column here. And that's because this is a nice example of linked open data in action. And let's start with the photographs that have not been uploaded directly to Pleiades, but these photographs, this one and the other ones that you see here, have actually been uploaded on Flickr, but they have been tagged with the URI for Agrigentum. And if you look here, you also see a number of aggregated information that comes in through Pelagios that tells you, for example, what are all the finds in the American Numismatic Society that relate to that place. And if we click on that, we see that we have 313 results in the American Numismatic Society, all related in a way or another to Agrigentum. Okay, if you go and play with Peripleo and you see that there is no map, it's all good, don't worry. You just go here and change the base map. We had some glitches with the maps in the last days, but you just go here and you select one of the two maps that are actually available. So don't panic if you see just the great white in front of you. Now, can I steal 5 more minutes, or shall I just hand it over to Anne?
Can you do it in 3?
Yes. So as we have seen, looking at the Pleiades Gazetteer, what are we talking about? So we have, let's say, the entity of the place. And what is this entity? What does it represent? It's our knowledge of the place. It's our idea of the place. We know that that place existed, either in a historical or in a literary context. And what is this place made of? Well, of its names. So how that place was called, maybe by different people or at different points in time. We have the locations, where that place used to be according to one or more sources, and we have the relations. So what other things are connected to this place? And one of the great things about Pleiades, which makes it actually one of my favorite gazetteers, is that some of these components are modeled separately. And the fact that they are, managed separately, you've seen, for example, that the names have their own page and so on. That enables us to create entities that are perfectly functioning, even if some information is missing. And when we deal with ancient places, it is actually very common that that some information is missing. So, for example, we could, just know that the place existed, but we have no idea where it was, or how people used to call it. Or we could just find the name because it was on a coin, or it was on an epigraphy, but we don't know where that was, or what people used to do there. Or maybe we know about a place because we have archaeological evidence, so we know the location, but we don't know anything else. And with this structure, we can actually still create URIs and say interesting things and create references to these places, even if the information that we have about them is incomplete. And now I use the example of Agrigentum. Actually, it wasn't that random, also because it had some connections to some of the buildings in the city. And that is because if you start to get excited about gazetteers and modeling the information about the places, then you start feeling and noticing that you want more granularity, that you want to, be able to go even a little bit deeper. And I'm really, really happy to hand it over to Anne to tell us more about urban gazetteers in particular. Sorry, I overran.
Thanks so much, Valeria, and thank you so much for teeing me up so perfectly. You've done such a nice and easy to follow introduction to linked open data and also to the overall concept of gazetteers. So thank you for running over so that I have such nice material to build on. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. I think you should be able to see that now. As you can see, I'm going to be talking about the Dura Europos Digital Urban Gazetteer, kind of a case study for this lecture. The case study that I'm presenting today is part of a larger project called the Yale Digital Dura Europos Archive. The acronym is YDEA. This project is aimed at reassembling and recontextualizing archaeological information from the ancient site of Dura Europos using linked open data. And an urban gazetteer is then a critical feature that will allow us to accomplish this larger task. So in case you're not familiar with the site of Dura Europos, it's located in eastern Syria and was excavated by Yale University and the French Academy of Inscriptions and Letters in the 1920s and 30s. It's this really fascinating site on the border between the Roman and the Persian empires. And in fact, the site passed back and forth between Roman and Persian control. And there's archaeological evidence from the site that tells us that the population was multilinguistic, that multiple religions were practiced side by side. The site contains the earliest known Christian church and a pictorially rich frescoed synagogue, in addition to all kinds of information about everyday life in the ancient world, thanks to some extraordinary conditions of preservation. Because of the site's importance and this extraordinary preservation, objects from the site have made their way into museum collections across the world, and I have those collections marked on the map so you can see here. This is great in principle for the purposes of trying to share out access to genuine artifacts from an important archaeological site so that more folks might be able to see them at a museum near where they live. But in practice, that means that these objects are contained in different databases that are not necessarily compatible with one another, and they're cataloged in different languages, meaning that there's not always been a way to search data on Dura Europos from a single web interface or a single language. So what the YDEA project wants to do is to make the site more accessible and easier to understand for specialists and non-specialists alike. And part of that is making the artifacts searchable together in a single interface, no matter where in the world those physical objects happen to reside. So we also want to make it easy to see which objects were found in what parts of the site and what kinds of assemblages of objects were found together. So the concept of linked open data that Valeria so nicely summarized is precisely meant to bridge the kind of linguistic and data formatting gaps that now carve up the Dura Europos data. But the key to virtually reassembling these artifacts within a linked open data environment based on where they're found within the site is a digital urban gazetteer. So let's step back for a moment. What do I mean by digital urban gazetteer? You probably have a sense based on Valeria's excellent introduction, but we'll walk through it just to make it clear. So since you've had Valeria's excellent introduction that included discussion of Pleiades, the simplest way to get the idea of an urban gazetteer across might be to say that what Pleiades has historically done on the macro level, the Mediterranean-wide level, with regard to disambiguating and geolocating cities and compiling all name variants for individual places, that's akin to what a digital urban gazetteer does on the micro site-specific level. So a digital urban gazetteer provides unique identifiers in the form of URIs that Valeria talked about, and helps to disambiguate potentially confusing naming traditions associated with individual buildings or other features within a city or site, and associates those places with geospatial data like specific coordinates. So I'm going to show you some concrete examples to illustrate what I mean. So the site YDEA is concerned with, Dura Europos, is sometimes referred to just as Dura. Taking that as our example, this is what I get, or what I got until very recently, when I searched Pleiades for Dura. You can see that there are 3 records that returned for that search, including the Dura in Syria, but also a site of the same name in modern Iraq. I can tell based on the preview that I'm showing you here, and the preview shows the geospatial locations, that the record that's relevant to the site I'm working on is the one all the way on the left that I've highlighted in orange. The associated unique identifier, also shown in the preview, that's the 893990 number above the location. That record ID is embedded in the site's URI. So within the linked open data ecosystem then, if we want to be sure that when we search for something related to Dura Europos in Syria, we link to the appropriate Pleiades record, this one on the left, to be sure that the results returned are relevant to this Dura in Syria, not that Dura in Iraq. But there's analogous problems at the finer site level of granularity. So historically, Pleiades was only doing this kind of disambiguation at the macro level. But now partnering with projects like Yedea and others on Pompeii and some sites in Mesopotamia, Pleiades is expanding its reach to include site-level granularity of coverage and develop urban gazetteers for ancient sites. So since Pleiades already has the expertise, the user base, the infrastructure to mint ancient world place-based URIs, it made sense to partner with them in creating a digital urban gazetteer for Dura Europos. So what I'll show you in the next part of the presentation is taken from our collaborative work in progress with Pleiades. Essentially, Yedea has brought content expertise into conversation with Pleiades' practical, methodological, and technological know-how. And I'd like here to acknowledge especially Tom Elliott and Jeffrey Becker, who have been our patient and knowledgeable shepherds at Pleiades. So why do we need this finer level of granularity at the site level? I'm going to use the Dura Europos example to illustrate why anybody would want to create a digital urban gazetteer in the first place. So to that end, there's 3 big points that I want to touch on. Digital urban gazetteers are useful for 1, disambiguating different places with the same name. 2, making clear when a single place has multiple names it's been associated with over time. And 3, disambiguating instances where you have a feature at the same place with the same names, but chronologically different archaeological levels. So let's drill down into point number 1. That's different place, same name. So at the site-specific level, imagine you have a name associated with a building or archaeological feature at your site, but it's a building name that isn't unique, and therefore the name might be used for a building in a different city. So for example, at Dura Europos, we have a building that is called by the excavators and in the literature, the synagogue. But there are other buildings, both ancient and modern, in cities around the world that might be, and in fact are, also called the synagogue, including the example I show you here from Ostia Antica in Italy. Obviously, the Dura synagogue and the Ostia synagogue are 2 different places and 2 totally different locales, but since they share a rather generic name, traditional keyword searching could conceivably confuse them. One of the things that a digital urban gazetteer does is to assign each feature like this, be it a temple, a gate, a house, what have you, a unique identifier, a URI, and geospatial coordinates, when applicable, in a particular part of a city so that features in your site can be differentiated from similarly named entities in other cities or sites. So like with historical gazetteer URIs at the macro level, linking to urban level URIs within a linked open data ecosystem helps to increase the specificity of your data set. So moving on to my second point, same place, different names. The other thing that urban gazetteers are extremely helpful for, and this is once again analogous to the work that gazetteers do at the macro level, is to gather together all of the various names that a place has been known by throughout history. That can be various names for the same place that were used in antiquity or at any stage thereafter, including more modern variants, whether those are different modern descriptive names or multilingual variants of a place name. So for Dura, we're in the process of publishing our gazetteer entries in Pleiades. So I'll walk you through a complex example of this for our site using just print published site plans, but then I'll demonstrate in Pleiades a similar though less complex example. So for now, let's take this example that I have on the screen here. This is what's sometimes called House F in block D5 at Dura Europos. Because the grid plan of the city was so evident at Dura Europos, the early excavators established a systematic reference system combining letters and numbers to identify individual city blocks within the site. You see that that scheme fully on the left in Jennifer Baird's plan that I've given you here. And highlighted on that plan in blue is the block known as D5. So within that house, within that block, there's a house, the geospatial entity that I've indicated in orange on the right side of your screen that has been called in different publications over the last 100 years by a few different names. So all of the names are modern, that are invented by scholars, since we don't know how the ancient inhabitants of the city would have referred to this specific place. So some scholars have referred to this particular house with descriptive names that are drawn from features of the structure, so including a house of the great atrium or the house of the cistern, among the others that I have listed here. Other scholars, meanwhile, have then referred to the same house in less interpretive terms by referencing its place in the city grid. So in this case, scholars adhering to the city grid reference scheme would refer to this house as house D5-F, the last on the list that I've given you there, which combines reference to the block D5 with a unique designation, F in this case, for each house in the given block. So this is tricky for both people and computers, since all of these different naming traditions make it difficult to understand that the same house is actually referenced in each of these cases. So if you're searching for records relevant to the House of the Great Atrium at Dura Europos outside of an linked open data environment, without someone having invested the time to create an urban gazetteer that tells a computer and a human researcher that the House of the Great Atrium is also known by these other names, and that relevant records might cite any one of these names, then a machine-based search would not automatically return all of the relevant records. And it would require that a researcher know all of these concordances in advance. So while I don't have block D5 published and ready to share in Pleiades, I can show you a less complex example of a structure with more than one modern name associated with it, so you can get a sense of how this information is structured in a Pleiades record. And this is similar to what happens at the macro level that Valeria has already demonstrated. So I'm showing you here the record for a part of the Dura Europos city walls known as Tower 2. And you see that title in the main section at the top of your screen. This very same tower is sometimes called Tower of the Archers. So within our Dura Europos Gazetteer in Pleiades, we have a single entry for the geospatial entity referenced by the names Tower 2 and Tower of the Archers. This entity has one set of coordinates indicated with the yellow arrow near the top of the record. But the variant names are listed in the names element that I've highlighted here in orange. Oh, sorry, actually, I haven't highlighted in orange, but just above where I've highlighted in orange, there's a mistake there. That's where the name variants are. So in practice, what this means is that no matter if you search for Tower 2 or Tower of the Archers, you should return this record, and the same should be true of any record linked to this record in the linked open data ecosystem. So let's move on to my third point, and that's linked open data urban gazetteers are useful for disambiguating which archaeological level is referenced when a building in question has multiple chronological levels. So since an archaeological feature with multiple building phases may be generally located in the same geospatial area and be referenced by the same name by scholars over time, but the specific coordinates of the feature footprint may shift with different phases of the feature's use. An urban gazetteer may be useful for enumerating and differentiating one building phase of a feature from the next. The case of succeeding phases of building activity on the site of the synagogue at Dura Europos, which I'll illustrate here, may serve as a helpful example of what I mean. So archaeologically, at least 3 different phases are evident in the middle block, in the middle part of block L7 that's highlighted roughly in orange on the left side of your screen. So those 3 archaeologically identified phases include traces of a building, probably a house, that precedes phase 1 of the synagogue. Since there's evidence to think that the synagogue came into existence around 150 CE, that is about the loose state, which the preceding building must have gone out of use and been replaced by the second one on your list, which is phase 1 of the synagogue. And in its first phase, the synagogue was confined to the western half of block L7 and abutted a house, which is L7-H to the east. Then lastly, and the level that is best preserved is number 3 on your list. And in that most recent layer, Aramaic inscriptions and the interior decoration of the synagogue's assembly hall tell us that the synagogue was renovated and expanded in approximately 244 BC when it absorbed house L7. So all of these relationships between levels and each layer's particular geospatial footprint as it shifts over time is structured into the linked open data records for each building phase in Pleiades. That means that records that link out to any of these individual layers will inherit the geospatial and chronological data specific to the layer that they're linked to. So let's look at that quickly. So here on the record for the synagogue, phase 1, on the left side of your screen, you can see it has its own URI. It has distinct coordinates marked for the specific footprint of the building at this particular phase. And I've highlighted those sections of the record with yellow arrows here. Each phase of the building in this area has its own unique entry in Pleiades with its own URIs, so that we can make structured statements, those triples that Valeria introduced, about the relationships between the levels that are readable by both humans and computers. So that's what's happening in the makes connection with section, highlighted here in orange. So there's structured statements that tell both humans and computers that synagogue phase 1 is part of block L7, that it succeeded the trace remains of what was possibly a house in the preceding era in more or less the same spot, and that this phase of the synagogue abuts the neighboring house, L7-H to the west. Similarly, in the receives connection from section that's just below and highlighted here in purple, synagogue phase 2 is marked as succeeding synagogue phase 1. If you follow that link to the unique record for synagogue phase 2, you'd additionally see structured statements that would tell you that that second phase of the synagogue not only succeeded phase 1 of the synagogue, but also house L7-H, which it absorbed and adapted to become part of the synagogue's expanded footprint around 244 CE. So all of this means that the succession of layers in this geospatial area, how they relate to one another, is structured into the Pleiades linked open data records for these phases, such that the information is carried with them wherever they're linked to within the linked open data ecosystem. So I've highlighted these 3 areas where digital urban gazetteers are useful. That is disambiguating different places with the same name, associating all the names given over time to a single place, and disambiguating but associating different archaeological levels at the same place. But in purely practical terms, what's the benefit or payoff of having a digital urban gazetteer with URIs for individual features at different chronological phases available? For Yedia's purposes, this is how we're making reassembly and recontextualization of artifacts held in different worldwide collections happen. So an individual feature and or building phase of a feature inside a site, each with its own URI, can stand as a reassembly point within a linked open data environment for artifacts that are physically held in different collections, but originally excavated at the same locale within the site. So to drive this home, you can take these two decorative tiles that I'm showing you on the screen as an example. The one on the left is from the Yale University Art Galleries, and the other on the right is in the Princeton Art Museum. Both originally belonged to the synagogue at Dura Europos, but specifically the second phase of the synagogue after about 244 CE. These two objects are obviously held in two different collections and are not searchable in a single database, but linking them within a linked open data environment to the Urban Gazetteer record in Pleiades for Synagogue Phase 2 at Dura Europos would automatically enrich the linked object records with the geospatial data contained in the linked Pleiades record for Synagogue Phase 2, such that it becomes evident to both humans and computer-based searches that these two objects came not just from the same place, the synagogue, but from the same phase of the synagogue. I happen to have chosen two objects that reside in American collections and so are cataloged in English, but linking in a linked open data environment to Synagogue Phase 2 would also bring together objects cataloged in different languages. So you can just imagine the potential here. All right, so now that I've spent time on the why question, that is why digital urban gazetteers are useful, I'll spend my last minute or so talking about how we've conceptualized this work into what seems to us a logical sequence that may be useful for organizing your own thinking about creating an urban gazetteer for other sites. So at Dura Europos, our strategy for building the urban gazetteer has been to conceptualize the site as a series of kind of nesting baskets. So at the level of the largest basket is the site as a whole. And that's what's depicted in yellow in my diagram. And this is the macro level that Pleiades has traditionally covered for all the sites in the Mediterranean. At the next smaller level, you have organizational features like the city walls that I've schematized here in orange. It would also be the streets and the resulting grid layout of individual blocks. The subregions of the city that I've marked here in blue, like the section of the town to the north, where there was an intramural military camp, or the portion of the city traditionally interpreted as the civilian zone, or the part of the city to the east known as the citadel. So each of those organizational units might then contain other entities at yet a finer level of granularity. So the city walls contain individual towers and gates that I've schematized in purple. The military and non-military sections of town contain city blocks here in pink that themselves then contain individual buildings shown in gray, and the citadel contains its own buildings without a block structure. One could even carry this down further to include even finer levels of granularity. You could define URIs for individual rooms within a building and even doorways and walls within an individual room if you had, say, frescoes that you wanted to be able to associate with particular walls within a room. Since Yedea is a brand new project, we're contenting ourselves for now with establishing the gazetteer to the building level. But the Pompeii Bibliography and Mapping Project out of the University of Amherst, University of Massachusetts Amherst, is an example of a project that is further along in the establishment of an urban gazetteer, and they're working toward granularity at the room and wall level. So I'll finish by quickly showing an example of this nesting basket concept, how it's communicated in Pleiades records for Dura's digital urban gazetteer. I'm showing you here on the top left the record for the entirety of the city's circuit wall. That corresponds to the orange ring on the schematic plan on the right side of the screen. And then in the section city wall makes connection with, marked in orange on that top record, You'll see that the city wall is part of Dura Europos. That is the conceptually next larger basket of the whole of the city, the yellow in our schematic on the right. That encompasses the city walls. Then on the record at the bottom of the screen, you can see in the mixed connections with section highlighted in yellow that Tower 1, the equivalent of one of the purple circles in the schematic, is part of the larger conceptual unit of the city walls, which were, of course, part of the city as a whole. So structured statements under connections, headings, and Pleiades are how those nesting relationships between parts of the site are expressed and encoded into the data for each spatial entity at the site. I am going to finish up here and just want to say a quick thanks, especially to Jennifer Baird, who I have not mentioned yet, and without whose spatial data, none of this Dura Gazetteer stuff would be possible. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rainer that is going to tell us about Recogito and its possibilities for geospatial data.
Yeah, thank you, Valeria, and thank you, Anne, for your presentations, which I think provide a perfect basis for what I'm going to present. From Valeria's introduction, I think we've heard that linked open data is about RDF, about URIs, technical complexities that you don't necessarily will want to deal with or you shouldn't deal with. So one of the goals that we have tried to pursue in the Pelagios project was always to try build tools that would allow you to participate in the linked open data ecosystem, but without actually having to be the technical expert that knows all about RDF. Then also, Anne, thanks for the great discussion on sort of the complexities of building an urban gazetteer, because I think Recogito can be a really useful tool for cases like that. Yeah, that without further ado, I think I would want to give you an overview of what the tool does, how it functions, how you can get your own materials in there, and how you can also use it to, for example, work with written sources, textual sources, when building data for an urban gazetteer, for example. So the tool is open source, which means that you can download it and install it, but you can't install it on your own computer. It's a server-based tool, so if you want to have it for your own institution, you will probably need to talk to your department IT. But luckily, we also run a free community instance at recogito.pelagios.org, and you can just go there, and when you go there, you will see this screen here. You can sign up for an account, and you can just use it. So there's no installation of anything required. It's just there. I will quickly log in with my own user here. So this is what you see when you enter the tool. We call this the workspace. Essentially, it's like a file manager where you can manage the documents that you upload. You can upload texts in different formats, like plain text, but you can also upload TI. And images in various formats. You can create folders, so you can get a bit of a structure in your workspace. And you can also import, so I won't go into the details of that, but you can also import from remote sources. For today, I've prepared some materials to go over the basics that the tool has to offer. Yeah, so here I have some texts. Let's start with some text that we uploaded, in this case, Thucydides, Peloponnesian War. A book that's, of course, very that's full and rich in geographical information. When you open a text, this is what you see, just a basic reading view, and you can make selections like you would expect in any tool with your mouse. And you can create comments, commentary annotation. So simple thing, add a comment, or you can use tags. I will later show some examples of what people are actually doing with this.
Can you make the text a little bit larger, please, Rainer?
Yes. Like this.
Lovely, thank you. Perfect.
Right, but what you really would want to do in Recogito, of course, is to do geotagging. So let's select text. The editor pops up, and you have these kind of category icon buttons here. Let's say, okay, I'm tagging this as a place. And now this is where linked open data and gazetteers come in. As soon as you do that, you will get a suggestion from the built-in gazetteers that Recogito has indexed. In this case, we see, okay, that's really not what we want. Just makes it a little bit smaller. So it's a Geohames match, and it matches this to something in the United States. That will happen often when you use the tool, but that's also why we have this warning down here. Whenever you create something automatically in Recogito, it will always have this kind of warning attached to it. Hey, this is an automatic match. Don't necessarily trust it. Everything's built around the idea that you have to have a manual confirmation. Otherwise, you don't necessarily can trust it. I can already store the annotation, but it will be marked as like grayed out because it's not confirmed. And only if I confirm it manually, it will be sort of become green. In this case, of course, it's a bad match. I will want to change it. So I click change, and I will get a list of alternative matches here. And now I can pick one that's better. In this case, yes, that's much better. I want to pick the gazetteer entry from Pleiades. And as soon as I do that, so the warning is gone because I've now confirmed this as a human user, and it's also marked with my username and the timestamp. So this, of course, is becoming more important when you work collaboratively, so that you will also always want to know who's made this decision to tag it like that. Just maybe a second example. This is probably something that the Americans haven't appropriated yet. Right, so this gives us a Pleiades reference automatic, so I just confirm, and that's it. Right, so you will probably be aware of something called named entity recognition. That's an automatic process where computers sort of identify place names automatically. You don't necessarily need to go this by hand. You also have this as a feature in Recogito. You can let Recogito automatically tag your text. I'm not going to show this. It can take some time. For a longer text, you might have to wait for 10 minutes. So I've just already prepared it. In this case, you can see this is a text that has 388 annotations. If we look quickly, this is automatically tagged. It is quite error-prone. NER sometimes tags places as people, people as places, assigns different the wrong gazetteer entries, but it might help you save some time, so especially with the tedious marking up and so on. The way you do it is if you select it in the workspace, you get this options drop down here. You click named entity recognition, and then you get a pop-up window where you can select different recognition engines. The engine will define, so different engines works better with different languages. So in this case, if we're working with an English translation, we'll pick the Stanford English language model, for example. And also important, of course, you can also pick the authority file. So if you know that you're dealing with a classical text, classical Greece, you will switch off all the gazetteers that are irrelevant, and just maybe keep Pleiades and maybe the digital letters of the Roman Empire. And in this case, you can already know that you won't get any bad matches or faulty matches from Geohames, for example. Right, let's take a look at another example, which maybe is sort of more aligned to the use case of urban gazetteers and sort of the complexities involved there, and also shows how you can use Recogito there. So as we've heard, Pleiades is already quite a good, it can serve as quite a good urban gazetteer for some places, and Pompeii is one of these places. So this is a text about Pompeii, and let's say we want to mark this text up because maybe we are looking for new name variants, or just maybe we want to just link new attestations from a historical source to Pleiades. So that's what Recogito makes really easy. So if we read through this, again, we will start tagging place references, mark it as a place, and especially when we work with urban spaces and text that might have descriptive names or may just describe them rather than have an actual place name, you will usually find no automatic match at all. And this is where the search becomes more important. I'm going to show some examples how you can use the search in sort of more power user kind of fashion. You will always have the selected text up here, and it sometimes helps to tweak this text a little, and then you will get more matches. So let's maybe remove this one and search again, and then you start to get matches. So in this case, maybe say, okay, this is actually what I want. It's the Torre Annunziata, and I tag it with this URI. Then let's say Naples. Okay, here maybe you might want to change between maybe if it's like this is a 19th century text, maybe you might think that the Geohames record is more appropriate for this after all. So you click here, and you get the list of sort of linked places. Let's pick the Geohames one. We confirm. And then this also sometimes happens. So this is an automatic reapply feature. So if you have multiple references to Naples in the text, Recogito will ask you whether you also want to apply it to those other occurrences. In this case, I think it's safe to do. Let's say yes. And if we scroll down somewhere, I hope I'll find it. It might be further down the line. But there's a second mention to Naples, and it's also now tagged. Other examples, what do we have here? Let's take this one, for example. So we have the Forum Nundiniarum, otherwise called the Soldiers' Quarters. So this is a case where we will definitely not find a match in the Gazetteer. But if we said, let's say we're an expert in Pompeii. I'm not an expert, but I stole the example from Valeria, so she knows about this. So the text says the letter name was given to the quadrangle. So let's say we want to look something up that that at least matches closely to what this is. So let's search, and let's try sort of an advanced search. Let's say quads, everything that starts with quads, and Pompeii. So you can use this kind of little sort of logical syntax to refine your search. And if we search for this, it returns us the quadriportals of the theater, which we say, okay, yeah, that's actually what I want to tag this with. Again, this is my decision. I might make a mistake, but again, it doesn't matter because it's not a fact. It's something that Rainer said less than a minute ago. That's always important. So, and finally, very briefly, there's something else in the tool which is called relations. Relations is a feature where you can create connections between entities that you have tagged. Let's say you want to, so you click on one annotation and you can connect it, and you can say this is maybe near or west of or whatever. You can use your own vocabulary and can start building up these kind of connections, as linked data connections between the entities in your text. Or do I find this? There's going to be some person name maybe somewhere. Anyways, let's say if you have a person mentioned, you might, I can't find any, can't find one at the moment. But let's say there's a reference to person. You can tag it as a person. One thing worth mentioning, we don't have the same kind of dictionary lookup for people as we have for places. So it would be great to have a Gazetteer of people as well. That's not there yet, but we can still mark something as a person. And again, we could say, here's the person, and the person speaks about whatever. So stupid example, but it gives you an idea of how you can start building up these kind of matches to the Gazetteer on the one hand, but also these kind of networks of knowledge that the source represents. Yeah, so as I said, I want to show you some examples of what people have done with this. One example that's also stolen from Valeria, which I really like, is this one, the Accounts of Arabia. So normally when you upload a text document, you can upload multiple text files. So that makes sense. So if you have a book with several chapters and every chapter is in a text file, you upload all the text files and you get one book with several parts. So that's basically how I thought about it. But Valeria was creative and she created a different kind of collection. In this case, she put texts in a single document which all speak about Arabia, but from different authors, so from Strabo, Procopius, and so on. All these texts were now geotagged. And once they're geotagged, we can also look at them in the map. I actually forgot to mention this, but yeah, there's not too much time anyway. So there is, of course, a map view. As soon as you've tagged things with Gazetteer references, you have the benefit that you can look at things on a map. So these are all the places that appear in all those texts. and you can change the filter settings down here to color the map by different kind of aspects. In this case, let's look at this by part. Part means every text Valeria put in this collection will have a different color. So we can see that Strabo, for example, talks about different region when talking about Arabia than Procopius, for example. And we'll also see those white areas here. That means that places are mentioned in multiple texts, so that's the overlaps. And again, it's a really nice and easy way to get a quick overview of your documents and get a quick new perspective on your documents without needing to deal with RDF, web mapping, and so on. Right, since we're short on time, I think I'll skip to the second bigger feature of Recogito, which is working with images. We've originally thought about this mostly from the perspective of tagging maps. That's, I think, where it's most useful. Again, you can upload images in different formats, and the interface looks pretty much the same. You have this kind of view from the map. You can zoom in, you can pan, you can also rotate, which makes is particularly useful when dealing with maps and the toponyms and all kinds of orientations. And up there in the toolbar, you have different kinds of tools. You have point tool, rectangle, or my personal favorite, this is kind of tilted box tool, which makes it easy that with just 2 mouse clicks, you can create a box selection which can be rotated in any angle. As soon as you do that, you get the same pop-up. It has an extra field here, which says transcribe. Let's say we want to tag this. So from personal knowledge, I know that this is near a place called Stykkishólmur in Iceland. Again, you have to bring your own knowledge about things sometimes to properly tag places. And again, we've created an annotation. We've mapped it. That means we can switch to the map view. We get our map marker. And if we click it, we get the information about the annotations. We get the snippet. You also get the snippets when you click in the text view, but it's just a text snippet. And you can navigate between text and image and so on. So that's the basics in terms of functionality. I, again, want to show you some examples that people have used this for in the real world. Once more, from Valeria, of course. This is a nice map. It doesn't look like a map, or at least not how we used to maps in the Western modern tradition, I would say. But it is a map of the Mediterranean from a book called the Book of Curiosities. So Valeria has transcribed or transliterated, I guess, some of these places. And I think this is a great example where mapping those places can give you different perspectives on this. So as such, you don't really know what kind of places this will portray. But if you tag some places and you look at the map, you can see, okay, we have the region here of the Turkish west coast. We have the Pillars of Hercules. We have the Levante. Let's say if we click in there, this one. And if you jump to the image, then we can see, okay, so this is the region of Gibraltar and North Africa, for example. So again, it allows you to get a different feel for the kinds of materials that you're working with. Or in this case, these are all the islands. So this is Sicily. And this one, I think, here is Cyprus. Yeah, one more example, maybe just very quickly, also to demonstrate that you can search. If you upload a document to Recogito, it's personal. Nobody else can see it, but you do have the option to share. You can share with other people within your group, within your class, but you can also make a document open to anyone on the web. And once that's the case, they also become searchable. On the one that they are indexed by Google, so they should be findable with Google dataset search, for example. But you can also search them with Recogito's built-in functionality. So I'm searching in this case for a an atlas that we have worked with in one of the Pelagios research projects. So this is one document which has been made public. It comes from a different account. It's not from my account, but it's publicly accessible and you can find it. And this is an atlas of multiple pages of the Mediterranean again, which has been meticulously transcribed. I think it's like 2,500 annotations overall. On the pages you can see it's like 800 annotations just on this page alone. And again, it's quite instructive and interesting to look at this on the map view, especially if you go again and you filter it by the part, for example, and you can instantly see which map, which atlas pages concern which area and which region, and which regions of Europe and the Mediterranean are covered by multiple atlas pages. Then if you click in there, you can see the different transcriptions. So you can see, okay, here's a place. It has been transcribed with different names. So these are different name variants. But it has been mapped to the same place by the person doing the matching. So it's also interesting. And again, you can sort of scroll through the toponyms as they appear in the atlas. Right, I think given that we're short on time, I'll stop the presentation here just to say that, yeah, you can also share. I mentioned that. You can also download your data in different formats. So it's not meant as an environment where you just add data and then it never comes out. But you can download it in different formats, from your spreadsheet format that gives you sort of one line per annotation that you've made. RDF, of course, is one of the formats that you can export. But also, if you're interested in the map, you can download GeoJSON, which is a format which would open in web mapping tools or desktop GIS tools. For text, you can also download TI. So you might upload TI, modify it, download TI again, or you might upload a plain text format and download it as a sort of simple TIs template that you can keep working on. But other than that, I think it's easy to use, so you can explore yourself freely. And I think the tutorial materials that are online are also pretty good by now. So we've spent a lot of work to make the tutorial resources more user-friendly and also deeper. So it's really, there's a lot of material now. And if you find something missing, then I think you can always get in touch with us, and we're interested to hear in your experiences and your needs and desires for future features and whatnot.
Rainer, could you very quickly show us the sharing page on one of your documents?
Yes.
Filter it to show us where to find it.
Pick any. Yeah, so it's always in this document settings on the right. If you click there, you have access to some simple metadata of the document. Annotation preferences is also something which is useful. You can pick the gazetteers, just like with name entity recognition. You can restrict which gazetteers you want to use. And sharing, yeah. So sharing, on the one hand, you can invite other people. That means the document can still be closed, but other people that you invite have access. You can give them read access, which means they will see the document and the annotations, but they can't annotate themselves. Write means that they can annotate themselves. And admin just means that they can also invite other users and things like that. And making it public, per default, as I said, it's off, so nobody will have access to the document. And then there are two options, anyone on the web and anyone with the link. The second one just means that you can take the link, email it to someone, and they will be able to open it. Anyone on the web, in addition, means that Google search engine will pick it up and index it. So potentially it can be found by Googling the document. But other than that, it's basically the same. And again, when you open the document, you can make it read only, but you can also allow annotation of the document. So you can essentially do some little crowdsourcing work with Recogito by making a document public and allowing anyone to annotate it. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
That's it.
Valeria, did you want to say a few words about the exercise?
Yes, very quickly, because I think that Rainer already showed you the most important things. So we we suggested 2 exercises for this class. The first is, let's say, a regular free Recogito annotation. So you choose your document and you go on with your annotation, and read the description, and all the information should be there. The second option is a little bit more challenging, and I'm not going to hide the fact that this is a challenging exercise. So try it only if you got excited about the idea of really doing some deep research work on Pompeian houses. So if there are people among you that are doing archaeology, art history, or just have an interest in Pompeii, this could be fun and also useful, and I'll tell you why, but don't feel like you have to do it. So that text that Rainer showed you is a 19th century tourist guide of Pompeii, and some of the buildings are described. So we thought it would be interesting to map this text and see what were, let's say, the itineraries that were suggested at the time to visit the city, and maybe compare them with modern itineraries. Of course, bearing in mind that not all monuments had been excavated at the time, but given the same monuments, what were the monuments that were more popular at the time. But also, I think that it would be a great way of actually catching the buildings that are not yet in Pleiades, or some of the names are not yet in Pleiades. And I can tell you, because I've tested this text myself, that you will find buildings that are not in Pleiades yet, because the coverage of Pompeii is not even close to be full. But some of the main buildings are there, and the most popular buildings are often the older, the buildings that were excavated first. So they are exactly the buildings that you find mentioned in these historical, let's say, historical history of tourism documents. So if you want to try that, I think that it would be really useful to, on the one hand, actually find the references to the places that are in Pleiades. And to do so, as Rainer showed, you might have to do a little bit of detective work, because this text does use sometimes names that are not very common anymore. And it would be great if you could access a library, and if you could actually access, books on Pompeian toponymy. But there is also a lot of information online. So you might be lucky, and you might actually catch the right, the more commonly known name of that building just using the internet. If that doesn't happen, still create an annotation for that place. Create an annotation that then you can distinguish from the others. So maybe an uncategorized annotation. So you don't select place, people, or event. You just create the annotation. It will show yellow. And then you can filter them at the end. And what you will have at the end of this exercise, if you decide to do it, you will have a list of missing entries from Pleiades that, why don't we then start adding them to Pleiades? You will have the names, you will have information about the location, you will have bibliography to cite and to say, okay, this place was called in this way exactly in this published document. So if you feel that you are up for this challenge, and again, it is a challenge, but it's also, I think, a very stimulating task, especially if you have done the regular annotation with Recogito the previous time. So yeah, that is your new mission if you decide to accept it.
Lovely, thanks, Valeria. So yeah, that's very useful advice for anybody who's watching this sort of in their own time or off their own back, and has is deciding what kind of exercise to do. Just for one subset of the people watching this, for my students, they already know which of those 2 exercises they're going to do, and some of them are indeed going to do the Pompeian handbook, and they're going to do it collaboratively as a group of 5. So they will have to figure out how to upload the document and share the document so that it's available for other people to work on and so forth. And the others will another group of 5 are choosing their own document, and I don't know what they've chosen yet, to upload and do some similar work on. And I think for both groups, and this is something for other people might want to think about, I think the thing I would really like them to think about is not just how many places they can annotate, but how many places they can't annotate. Once you can't annotate a place, what information do you need to gather about that place to first be sure it's not in any of these gazetteers. It's not just in there under a different name and you haven't figured it out yet. But then what information would you need to add it to that gazetteer? We may not actually add it to the gazetteer this week, but if you were going to add it, look at what, you know, Pleiades or these other gazetteers say about a place. They have attestations, they have name or names, they have date information for each name, attestations for each name, all that sort of information, coordinates. The coordinates have to have a provenance. They have to come from somewhere. Did you go to the place with a GPS unit? Did you get it from OpenStreetMap, etc.? Think about all the kinds of information you're going to need to get in order to be able to construct a gazetteer of the places that you couldn't annotate in Recogito. So that's the challenge. So if you want the slightly more advanced version of this, or if you're one of my students and you do the more advanced one, whether you like it or not, that's one of the things you could be one of the starting point for thinking about that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would also suggest to look at how download from Recogito in CSV looks like, and think of how can you stretch the fields that are already in a Recogito CSV to add that information at the moment in which you are creating the annotation. So, for example, you want to say, variant names, maybe use the comments or use the tag or whatever. You look at that, look at what are the fields in the CSV and think creatively, how could you use them? And if you're doing this collaboratively, of course, it's very important that you do it consistently.
Yeah, great. So we are a little bit over time, but if everyone's still okay to hang around for a couple of minutes, we could still take questions if anyone wants to. I see there's been one question in the chat that Rainer has already answered. The question was, will Recogito ever do NER recognition for Greek? And the answer was basically, it's complicated, but there is an ongoing discussion about what format these tools might be in. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Rainer?
Yeah, I was just typing the answer. Yeah, it's complicated, but there is always the need for a little bit of code to be written to attach the tool to Recogito. But we have examples for tools based on Java, programming language, Python. That's where most of the action currently happens for language processing. Also tools that are just command line tools or tools that are server-based and sit somewhere else and work via a remote interface. So you have to write some code, but we have examples for most of the technologies that are in question, I think. And if anybody has an idea, I am happy to consult on that and talk about that. The code that needs to be written is minimal. It's really just a bit of crosswalking to translate between the dialects that Recogito needs and the other tool outputs.
Great, thanks. Did anyone else have any questions for each other or anything you wanted to add to what's been said so far?
I just feel very bad because it's so late. So I think I will I will send my question to Anne via email. I'm really delighted. I think you're doing a great job. The way that you're using the Gazetteer to make distinctions between the archaeological phases is brilliant. I really like it.
Yeah.
It wasn't a question, sorry.
Great. Okay, then I think that's fine. We are over time, so yeah, I'll thank all three of you again, and remind people to join us next week when we'll be talking about intangible cultural heritage, and we'll have another example of a gazetteer and a mapping platform being shown then next week. So thank you all again very much, and bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.